If this is true, where do we start?
I know you must have questions. Please. Anything I can do to help you understand.
Kelogg. He worked for you?
Kelogg. He was an Institute asset long before I arrived here.
And here, another interesting point of note. If you remember Kelogg, when he first kidnapped Sean as a baby, he refers to the old man. When you meet him in his memories, referring to the old man. We know that, right here, it's saying that Kelogg was an Institute asset long before he arrived here, so there's a little bit of an inconsistency here. Now, there obviously was a director before Sean, probably not that long ago, let's be honest. You know, Sean would have had to grow up, become an adult, become a respected scientist, then become the director. So, if it's been 60 years, so that makes him 60 years old, let's give a reasonable time frame, 20 years. So he becomes director when he's 40. That means that the 40 years previously, plus however many years before that, with the previous director, Kelogg was working for them, right? So when Kelogg is referring to the old man, does he just... There's weird inconsistencies with it. He refers to it like the old man here, the old man here, but it doesn't feel... there's no ever reference to a change in management, or, you know, it's just kind of weird how it all seems like it's the same old man. So it almost seems like Sean himself sent Kelogg to recover Sean, which, you know, it's the way he just refers to him as old man, and there's never any reference to the change in leadership outside of Sean. It's kind of weird. Yeah, it's the thing just kind of, it's all weird. When we get to Virgil and the FEV lab, there's stuff like that where he's talking about the FEV stuff that happens there, and they refer to the director. There never feels like there's a point where the director, the management changes. Like Sean and the previous director are one and the same, which I suppose is a fair point you can make. He was raised in the Institute. He would have the same values as the Institute, but I mean, really, the only thing we have to go on is that as we talk to the various people in the Institute, we'll find out from Sean, you know, that the Child Synth project is pretty new, and it's basically recreated on his, you know, his psyche. And the entire reason, as we find out later on, is that he basically wanted to give Child Sean to us after we'd been released. And I believe it's implied that he actually got the cryosleep pods to malfunction so we'd be released. And he basically he's basically trying to give us back the child that was lost. So, you know, he sees this sort of as a way for him to reconnect with his parents through his surrogate son, because of so much time has passed and he knows he's going to die. Which I suppose is a fair enough point. You know, it kind of explains why the Child Synth project began and all that. But like I said, yeah, it's kind of weird how it all kind of plays together, because there's no real point where you feel like the actual, like the Institute management changed. So clearly Kellogg, so yeah, it's Sean and the previous management are apparently very similar. Unless, of course, we go back to what Dima says in Fahaba, and we're a synth. Things make a lot more sense if you're a synth replicant of the real player protagonist who died in the cryo vault, and then having Sean, you know, and having Sean release you, or pretending to release you, and then connecting you with a child version of himself, a synth mother and a synth child. It all makes a lot more sense if you're actually a synth as well, doesn't it?
It wasn't until I became director that I learned of all the things he'd done. What kind of man he was.
You knew the man was a psychopath, but you used him anyway?
Would you have preferred that I turned him loose on the Commonwealth? At least keeping him on a short leash kept the collateral damage to a minimum.
No comments with that one.
Took advantage
Logical.
of Kellogg's vicious nature. I will freely admit that. Institute technology prolonged his life, and his usefulness far beyond any normal human lifespan.
And here is where I'm going to make another comment. He says Institute technology prolonged Kellogg's life. So, okay, so we can easily believe that Kellogg's, at least 100 years. If he's like probably 100 years old, because he kidnapped Sean 60 years ago, so give him another 40 years, maybe older than that. He has to be relatively old. Though, the tricky part here is that we know Kelogg, as a child, was in the NCR. Does anyone here know the time frame for Fallout 1 and 2? Because, honestly, the numbers don't really match up. We know there's a minimum of 60 years. He kidnapped Sean 60 years ago. We can't get around that. So that means that he kidnapped Sean, 50 years prior to Fallout 3. Because Fallout 4 takes place 10 years after Fallout 3. We know Kelogg had to be operating for a while as a... Let's say the 60 years is just all of his extended lifetime. That's still 50 years before Fallout 3. What about... So how does that timetable work up? He was in the NCR reconstruction, which is probably Fallout 1, Fallout 2, something like that. I don't know the timetables of Fallout 1 and Fallout 2 after the war. But we're already looking at 150 years after the war is when Kelogg was an adult operating as a mercenary, at the very minimum. We're starting to get very close to the point where basically Kelogg is a post-war character, but was active pre-war. And that just doesn't really work. Because if he was a pre-war person, then the NCR wouldn't exist when he was a child. So the timetable's starting to get a little bit fidgety. And of course, there's the other side of this issue, which I'm pausing. I have the thing paused on. Sean, father, knows that Kelogg is this horrible person, clearly ruined his life and all that. He knows that Institute technology prolonged his life, so why doesn't he, pull back the Institute technology? Why doesn't he pull out the Institute technology? We know when we fought Kelogg, he was still working for the Institute, even though technically when you look at him in the game files, he's not a member of any faction, not even the Institute faction. He's a free agent. He's not a raider. He's not a courser. He's not Institute. He's not Diamond City resident. He's in no factions whatsoever. So that could just be a game thing, just so that he doesn't flag as friendly to any particular faction. And, for example, if you put him in the Raider faction and for some reason or another you have friendliness with the Raiders, it would cause the battle to break because he'd be friendly to you because you're friendly with Raiders. You get what I'm saying. So I can just assume that's a gameplay thing, just to make sure that he's always hostile to you and that there's no way whatsoever that he could possibly be friendly to you. I can accept that. But again, he acts like he's still a member of the Institute, which means that Father not only is continuing to extend his life, continuing to provide him with funding, and continuing to give him jobs, even after everything he knows about Kelogg, which is odd. Oh, you have a timeline. Let me take a look at that while we are talking about timelines. Fallout begins in 2160. Fallout Tactics. Fallout 3 is 2270. So we remove 50 years from that, and that gets us to 2220. So he was an adult at 2220, which is a little 12 years after Fallout Brotherhood of Steel begins. Pull this onto camera. And turn off Fallout 4. Alright, so we're here. We're looking at, like I said, 2270 Fallout. This is when Fallout begins. We take away 50 years. We're somewhere around 2220. So we're after Brotherhood of Steel. That's bare minimum. That's when he grabs. This is when he grabs Sean, 2220, which means he's an adult at this point. So let's say he's 20 years old, 20 or 30 years old. This means that his lifespan falls within this. But if his lifespan had been extended before, which is Sean's implication, that its new technology had extended his lifespan. So this, I mean, I suppose it's fair. That's 30 years when Fallout 1 begins. So, I mean, that's really the problem, isn't it? He's already pre-Fallout 2, just by default. Before we calculate anything else into it, he's before Fallout 2. So, his adulthood, any things that extend his life, his childhood, all have to fall within this range, 2160 to 2120. Which is, what, 40, 60 years. Okay, 60 years isn't too bad, but we have to consider that he has to be a child sometime after the NCR is formed. The NCR is formed... Was the NCR formed in Fallout at the end of Fallout 1 or Fallout 2? That's what I don't recall. When did the NCR become an actual thing, an actual force to be reckoned with? Because that's the key. As a child, Kelogg is referred to as, you know, the NCR is referred to on the radio. So he looks 40. Yeah, you make a good point. 40. He looks 40 or 50 when he takes Sean. So you know he's got only 60 years to work with. So you know that's 10 years. You know, if you say, let's say he's 40 and they extended his lifespan, or even let's just say it was slowing his aging, not stopping it. So I mean, like I said, there's only a 60-year window we can work with, and within that 60-year window, he has to have been a child after the NCR was formed. When was the NCR formed? I can Google that. NCR Fallout. New California Republic from the Fallout Wiki. In 2186, the town of Shady Sands changed its name to New California Republic and formed a trial council government. So we're looking at 2186 is our key point in time. Okay, that's fair enough, 2180 around here. We know at bare minimum this is when he took Sean. And he had to have been a child sometime over here. So that makes things even trickier, doesn't it? Because if he's like, what, 10 then? So if it's like 20, let's say it's 2190 when we have the flashback. It was 2190, more in 2180. He got to see the forming happened in his lifetime as a child. Kind of makes sense there. But that means then that, you know, he's now 20 here. He's 30 here. He's 40 at 2020 when he kidnapped Sean. He hasn't actually had his life extended at that point. Because this is when he kidnapped Sean, so this is when he's actually been working for the Institute. Which means that he had to have been recruited somewhere around here. Between 2010 and 2020. This had to have been when he was recruited by the Institute. And working with the Institute for 10 years is fine. But the entire age extension thing doesn't really work unless after... Well, no. I suppose it can still work, because if he's 40 and he's gotten the cybernetic enhancements around here, Sean is still a baby. This is 60 years to give Sean to grow up. And Sean's not, of course, obviously the leader of the Institute at this point. He's still under the old management. So I suppose if they started giving him the cybernetics here to prolong his life, we get to 21, you know, 6, we get to... So, suppose it can work,